Thank you all for coming. Today, a fable entitled The Ills of the Father. Long ago, where many lessons are learned and forgotten, there was a kingdom. This kingdom was great in size, but strangely unobtrusive in disposition. Far did its borders stretch, strong was its fighting force, and many were its peoples. In contrast, its king was a humble, pacifistic man. His rule was long, maintained through peaceful concessions and what some might call rather undignified caving to demands. Neighboring rulers spoke fondly, and in truth rather smugly, of the times the king gave of his treasury and his lands to avoid conflict. Indeed, he himself and his advisers were proud of such instances. "Remember the time we awarded 100 million crown grant to the peasant farmers when they grew so discontent they threatened an uprising?" One would chortle between sips of wine. "Or the 500 furlongs of hunting ground we gave to the barbarian tribes so they would not invade," another would mention, heedless of the ground lost forever to the kingdom, for the sake of peace. As a result of such mentality, enemies of the kingdom grew comfortable, expanding ever further onto the lands. The peasant farmers grew lazy, and their output decreased dramatically, for they knew that all they would ever have to do was complain for more money. In addition, the tribesmen wandered ever closer to the populated cities and villages, hunting as they pleased, game and adventurer alike. So the king remained in power, for many years as a matter of fact, if indeed it could be called that, and all through generosity and altruism, completely for the sake of pandering to any who would accept. Courage. No such thing could stand forever. In fact, there were two princes, strapping young men by this time, and they did not see eye to eye with their father in these matters. Raised primarily by tutors and combat instructors, they were each well learned in matters of politics, deeds and ownership, finance and defense, and all the things needed of those in line for a crown. They were both formidable hands with swords, and did not appreciate their future kingdom shrinking and weakening itself. The older of the two was vocal and demonstrative, the other most always in agreement, but preferring to take a supporting or background role. There comes a time, sooner to some of us than others, when discontentment must breed action. For our princes, this time came when their father withdrew his forces from the eastern border, allowing formerly cave-dwelling goblins to surge forth and lay claim to that land. "It is to appease them and dissuade them from an attack or an invasion," came the king's justification. The first prince would hear none of it. "Not goblins, not in my kingdom." He and his brother gathered a long-neglected detail of soldiers and marched east, laying waste to the goblin forces already beginning to amass. In a single night, scores upon scores of the creatures were cut down, dampening the earth and the forces' uniforms with their blood. "Father, our foes to the east have been decimated. We can reinforce our border once again," the prince told the king the next morning after he and his brother had bathed and rested. "Fools!" the king shouted furiously. "What have you done? Now surely the goblins will rise against us!" The prince smirked. "I promise you, father, the goblins will be hard-pressed to rise even for breakfast for a long time to come." "Warmongers!" came the king's shouted accusation. "You are no sons of mine!" And with that denouncement, everything came bubbling to the surface in the elder prince. Years of watching helplessly as his kingdom was stepped upon and mocked, anger at the unreasonable allowances his father had made in the name of peace, hate from the nearby kingdoms and city-states who dared make such demands. And yet, amid all this, came clarity. No longer could he forgive the blatant weakness of his ruler simply for the sentimental family ties. He knew what he must do. He raised his fist and struck his father, the blow catching the king in his nose and shoving it backwards into his brain. The king was a cooling corpse on the marble tiles of his audience hall before he knew what had happened. A moment after that, his crown sat comfortably on the brow of his son, the new king, with his other son, the new king's closest advisor, standing by. This change spelled the dawn of a new age of prosperity, the likes of which the kingdom had not seen for generations. For years after, the new king undid all that his father had done. His armies grew stronger. The peasantry quickly learned that they would starve if they did not produce, and great stretches of land on all sides were retaken, oftentimes by force none had thought could be mustered. The borders expanded outwards, and all who had previously taken advantage of the kingdom either became a part of it or became part of its soil. So complete, so admirable was the new king's success that he gained the attention of the Dark Lord. Dahkoar appeared before the two brothers in their throne room as a cloud of darkness, sending them both to their knees in supplication and reverence. It spoke with the voice of 1,000 ravens. "For you, a crucible. Henceforth, you shall speak with my will. The words that you speak shall be. Choose them wisely." "Your Majesty," came the advisor's voice the moment the darkness had lifted, "we have been given a gift above all gifts. We must move to honor it at once. Build a grand temple to his greatness. Elevate the kingdom's clergy to aid in government. Teach the masses of his—" "Yes!" The king cut him off, beside himself with his newfound power. "And this throne shall be made of platinum, and the steps leading up to it shall be comprised of nubile young men and women aching to yield all to me, their king." And as he said these things, they instantly came to be, for his word and his will was that of the Lord Dahkoar. "Gilded gold shall make up the walls of this throne room." And then it did. He mounted the living, naked steps to his throne and sat upon it, turning to his brother. "And you, my faithful adviser, you shall travel from this place and spread the word of the Lord, enact everything you just suggested, and leave me to this place." The adviser was compelled out and away to do just that. Troubled at the display his brother the king had put on within scant seconds of receiving his gift, he nonetheless obeyed, for he could only obey the will and the word of the Lord, even spoken through his brother's mouth. The next week saw learned priests and priestesses installed amongst the greater nobility. After that came a trip to the capital, overseeing the construction of a grand temple, a place of worship, all black basalt and towering spires that reached for the heavens. This he directed as thoroughly as he did the education of the ruling class, lord, general, and clergyman alike. Thus, it was several months before he left these operations and returned to the palace. Upon said return, he was dismayed to find things in disarray. The streets were once more filled with commoners who were not working. guardsmen who milled unconcernedly about, and general unrest. He entered the palace to find it changed dramatically. All around him were signs of decadence and indulgence. Half-eaten foods, half-drunk and half-dressed subjects, and gaudy additions to the furniture and decor were everywhere. "I must find the king," he said to himself with a scowl. The king was in his royal chambers, languishing naked on a living bed of consorts. The once proud and strong warrior had become a mess, all heaving fat and quivering jowls. He sipped expensive wine from a golden goblet and drunkenly greeted his brother. "Welcome home. You see what the Dark Lord has granted us?" The advisor stared at the king and protested. "Do not attribute this obscenity to the Dark Lord. What is this? What of your rule? As we speak, the citizenry abandon their work and plot riots in the streets. I have done what you have decreed. Now why do you lie here in decadence as all the hard work we put in begins to unravel?" The king belched as he forced himself to a sitting position. "What care I for the citizens? So they stop working. I can create wealth with a simple thought. Come, brother, join me. Leave all this tired business to someone else. We have done great things. Now it is time to rest and celebrate." Much like his brother all those years before, the advisor had an awakening. This soft, complacent thing before him was beyond all use or reason. This king would neither rule the people nor serve their god effectively any longer. So he drew his blade, and before the king could so much as protest, he hilted it in the older man's heart. Yet again, the crown was removed from the failure and placed upon the head of a successor. And just then, the darkness of Dahkoar's presence filled the chamber. Again came that voice. "The crucible was not for the king, but for you. Serve me well. You chose wisely." Two ills take place in this tale: weakness and complacency. The first king was weak. He had so much to give, and yet each time he gave, he lost something, be it land, prestige, or money. His time on the throne was long, but so poorly spent, his end was a fitting one. But what of our warrior turned fool? He had ahead of him an enviable future. He possessed the strength of arms and the force of will to lead the kingdom to prosperity, even from the sad state in which it had existed before. But, alas, no staying power. He was offered a blessing, which he immediately squandered on silly and useless things, because he had thought that there was nothing left to prove or achieve. This is never the case. It is within our very natures to strive for perfection, the perfect mate, the perfect clan, the perfect guild. And we embrace this as servants of Dahkoar, who seek to strengthen ourselves in his service. To quote what our guild lord once told us, "We are not perfect as our lord Dahkoar. We are mortals, and to suggest that we are perfect like him is sacrilegious." This is true. As mortals, we could never achieve the divine, but it is our lot to reach for it. I am by no means perfect, but I will always press for the nearest I might attain. Earlier, I wondered to my colleagues what the worst ill to befall a newly ascended leader might be, and I received some interesting responses. Lack of respect due to youth and inexperience, difficulty rallying new subordinates, being overtaken by unfamiliar responsibilities. While all of these are valid concerns, what I fear most is complacency. At no point are we finished. At no point do we stop as though we've achieved greatness, regardless the power and station we may hold. There is always more, always higher. Failure to acknowledge this will ultimately see us like the second king, soft, fat, and every bit as weak and feeble and ineffective as the one who came before us.